Today we're getting our very first drive in this, the brand new second generation Volkswagen Amarok. Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. If you know your utes, your pickups, your backies, you'll know that under the skin, the new Amarok is related to the Ford T6.2 Ranger. But in today's video, I'm going to take you through all the ways Volkswagen has changed up the Amarok to differentiate it from the Ford. And you'll be surprised at just how deep that list goes. We'll do all of our usual things. We'll check out the engine, the interior and the tech, and then we'll take the Amarok for a drive on road and off to see whether this new ute should be wearing a Volkswagen badge and if you should spend your money on it. Before we get started, hit subscribe. But let's start with the one key way the Amarok is very similar to the Ranger, and that's the engine. This is the Amarok Aventura. It'll be the top spec Amarok when it lands in Australia in April 2023 for probably the high 70,000s range. Now this is a 3-litre turbo diesel V6. The old Amarok was famous for its V6 engine. That's not this engine. This is a Ford PSA Lion engine. It's still a good one though, 184 kilowatts of power, 600 Newton meters of torque. When we take the ute for a drive in just a minute, I'll let you know if this engine is better or worse than what Volkswagen were using in the outgoing Amarok. You'll also be able to option the Aventura with a really tasty optional engine, which is a 2.3 litre turbo petrol 4-cylinder that we've seen in Ford's hot hatches like the Focus RS, so that should be pretty tasty. On the lower models, you'll also have a 4-cylinder diesel option. There'll even be a manual base model. And as for hybrids and electric, we know that this new generation of Amarok is fully capable of being fully electric. It's built that way, so I'm sure in a few years' time, we'll be seeing a battery electric version of this ute. As I mentioned, this rather fetching blue ute that I'm sitting in here is the Amarok Aventura. Now, Volkswagen are going to have twin flagships for the new Amarok. There's this GT road-focused Aventura, and there's also a Panamericana, which has got rugged styling, 18-inch wheels and all-terrains, compared to the 21-inch wheels and street tires fitted to the Aventura. Which way should you go? I'll let you know when we drive the thing in just a minute. But actually, the volume seller is going to be the Style, which looks like a potential sweet spot in the range when optioned with the V6 diesel engine. But the interior is suitably differentiated from the Ford Ranger. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that you'll not see a single part from the Ford, because you will. I'm talking indicator stalks, I'm talking the basic screens here. We've got a 12-inch vertical touchscreen, we've got a 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster, oh, and this motorized automatic shifter. But beyond that, it's actually incredibly well differentiated from the Ford, and you can tell that Volkswagen has spent a lot of money doing it. So the actual shape and finishings of the dashboard are different. The plastics have different graining. The leather is different. It's a fully unique seat to Volkswagen with totally different shaping. It's much more comfortable than the seat in a Ranger Wildtrak, I'll tell you that much. And particularly the virtual cockpit or digital instrument pack ahead of you has completely unique graphics. It looks like you're in a Volkswagen, but it doesn't work exactly the same way. And that's because the infotainment system is Ford's Sync system, Sync 4, but it's just been disguised extremely well with Volkswagen graphics, Volkswagen fonts. But unfortunately, one of the things you can't do is put a full map in front of you, and that's because the basic Ford architecture doesn't allow that to happen. But still, everything works pretty much like a modern VW. We've got a proper knob for volume. Your climate control is driven through the screen, which is a little annoying, but you've got nice piano keys down here for drive modes, climate, parking, all of that sort of thing. That's pretty cool. In terms of fit and finish, this is a premium ute. We've got lovely leather on the seats. They're very shapely, 10 ways of electric adjustment for the driver. You can get comfy. And we've got faux leather up here on the dash and the doors, but it looks real and it's very attractive to sit in this ute, look out over the shapely bonnet and just take in your surroundings. It feels a step above the Ford and many steps above something like a Toyota Hilux in terms of ambience in the cabin. A very nice update for the Amarok. Now, of course, this is the top-end car, but all Amarok specs, even the base model, have a good vertical touchscreen here. 10 inches is as small as it gets in this car, 12 inches on the high specification variants. Everything has a digital instrument pack, and we've got a nice leather steering wheel here. Proper physical buttons, thank God for that. Ford stalks, that doesn't matter. And Harman Kardon premium audio here at the top of the range, and the stereo sounds really good. But while the Aventura is the most impressive looking spec, and the Panamericana is pretty cool too, this is the Amarok that most people are going to buy according to Volkswagen Australia. This is the Amarok Style, and it's actually like a sort of mid to high grade spec that will be a fair bit cheaper than the Aventura, but it still looks pretty cool. You've got silver detailing, it's quite an elegant looking specification. As standard, it has the 2-litre bi-turbo 4-cylinder diesel, but you can optionally choose it with the 3-litre V6 diesel as well. It's quite premium inside. It's going to have micro fleece seats as standard. You'll be able to option leather on the Amarok Style grade. So depending on where the prices end up landing for this ute, the Style could be the sweet spot in the range. The previous Amarok had a really small back seat, as if it was an afterthought, and comically tiny back doors. The new gen is still not the most spacious in the segment, but it's definitely an improvement. As you can see, you can get an adult back here. I'm 6 foot, driver's seat's in my driving position. I've got okay legroom, really good headroom, tow room is comfortable. You could get someone in the 5th seat, but there is a bit of a hump in the floor. We've got a bunch of new features here though. Not only do we have a flip down armrest with cup holders, we've got air vents for the first time, we've got rear airbags for the first time, we've got AEB in the car for the first time too, plus a 150 watt power socket, household power point, AC power back there as well, loads of storage spaces. So it kind of feels like a Volkswagen SUV in the back. And VW Australia thinks they're going to do a bunch of new business from people that currently own a Tiguan or a Touareg or a Passat and are tempted by the idea of getting into a dual cab ute, particularly now that this one feels so luxurious. Here around the back of the Amarok, we've got this new stamped tailgate, which looks pretty cool, and check out the high series tail lights. I actually think in terms of utes that are a collaboration with another manufacturer, the Amarok looks the most individual of any of those that I can think of, and the exterior design was fully done by Volkswagen, same as that interior. Now, what about around the back here in the tray? Well, it is damped, and we've also got an electric roller shutter there, which doesn't sound quite as grainy as that Toyota Hilux Rogue that we drove together recently. Once that is slid out of your way, you've still got a really versatile tub. Now, when Volkswagen decided to partner up with Ford on a 2nd gen Amarok, they insisted that you're still going to have to be able to fit a Euro pallet in the tray, and you can do that. So it's got a wider tub than most utes in this class. You've also got 4 tie-down points. They can take 400 kilos of tensile lashed load. And, you know, it's a clean, flexible, open tub. You got 12 volt, not too much more to say about it other than it's a good size. Before we filmed this review of the new Amarok, I asked on our YouTube channel if you had any questions that you wanted answered. I've gone through, I've read them all, I've answered them all, and we'll have a separate new Amarok Q&A video going up on the Chasing Cars channel soon, so make sure to subscribe. So, I've given you an overview of the Amarok's engines and the interior and the tech, but what about the drive? Because for me at least, this has been the most exciting thing about jumping into the new Amarok. Does it just feel like a Ford Ranger, or has Volkswagen successfully made this ute feel like a VW? Well, the answer, I think, is going to interest you, because it sort of depends on which model of Amarok you choose. Because if you go for the Aventura, you're getting a Volkswagen developed suspension, whereas the other models use the same hardware in the suspension as Rangers, but with a Volkswagen specific tune. However, the Aventura has its own dampers, which really change the whole driving experience and make it feel quite different to any Ranger on the road. And I'll explain what that means in just a minute. But the car I'm driving here has Ford's 3-litre turbo diesel V6, a single turbo. It makes 184 kilowatts of power and 600 Newton meters of torque. So in terms of pure numbers, displacement, cylinders, it sounds very similar to the diesel V6 that Volkswagen has been using in their own Amarok for the last 5 years. But in character, this engine is quite different. Now, if you go and test drive a Ranger V6 today, you'll know exactly what the engine feels like in the new Volkswagen Amarok, because there's really no change at all in that department. Not that that's a bad thing, because the diesel V6 that Ford has decided to use in the Ranger and that Volkswagen is borrowing for the Amarok is actually a really good engine, and in some ways it's better than the diesel V6 that Volkswagen developed for their own Amarok. Explaining what I mean by that is quite easy, because I'm doing it right now. I'm accelerating from a standing stop up to meet the same speed as the traffic, and the new Amarok's diesel V6 simply has noticeably less turbo lag than Volkswagen's own 3-litre TDI. Now the Volkswagen engine is a good one, it's known for being pretty reliable, but being a big single turbo diesel V6, it's got a whole heap of turbo lag. Sometimes you're waiting a second or a second and a half for it to come on boost, and you've kind of lost your opportunity. Now Ford's engine is also quite a big single turbo diesel, however they've just done more work in calibrating it, I feel, for use in a vehicle like this, and you just get better, crisper, smoother throttle response. The engine sounds really good. We usually find that V6 or 6-cylinder diesels sound a lot nicer than a 4-cylinder diesel. They have way less of that clatter, so let's listen here. You just get this kind of meaty, bassy noise from the engine. It does have a lot of turbo whistle though, the 3-litre diesel in this car, so it's a little louder in terms of whistle than the old Amarok V6, but the engine is just incredibly effective. We've got a 0 to 100 time of about 7.7 seconds out of a Ranger Sport V6, so I imagine we'll get a similar result from the Amarok. In terms of the braking, we'll have to wait and see until we can performance test the vehicle. Now in the Ford, it's a very modest step up from the 2-litre diesel to the 3-litre. For the Volkswagen, the V6 is going to be standard in the Panamericana and the Aventura. It's not an option, but in the style, you'll be able to get it with either the 2-litre as standard or the 3-litre as an option. Now, I think going for the V6 is a no-brainer. It sounds better, it goes harder, and the fuel consumption is really not that different to the 4-cylinder. And over our extensive launch drive here in South Africa, where the new Amarok is being built, I've got 10 litres per 100 Ks in mixed driving, which for this amount of power in such a heavy vehicle out of a V6 engine, I think is excellent. So just do the V6 diesel, I reckon. Unless that 2.3 litre turbo petrol ends up being really great, because that could be a peach. It'll be lighter over the nose in particular. And that brings me on to the handling of the new Amarok, which is good, especially if you go for the Aventura. So it's got a completely different steering tune to the Ranger, and you can really tell. In fact, the steering feels a lot like the steering in the old Amarok, and that's a good thing because that was the best steering ute of the entire segment, and it's been pretty faithfully replicated in the new vehicle, which is quite hard because it's a totally different platform, totally different hard points, totally different suspension, not that easy to replicate a steering tune. When it comes to the suspension, it's a very different car to the old Amarok. Now the old Amarok rode pretty well, but it probably just lacked the final layer of polish, and that was starting to become a little bit more clear through the years as we started to get vehicles like the Ranger Raptor and the Nissan Navara Warrior with Aussie developed suspension. Now, the Amarok, which was engineered in Australia and does have an Aussie tuned suspension, rides even better. It's still a dual cab ute, so don't go expecting it to feel like an SUV. You're always going to get some of those low speed jitters because the rear end is set up to carry a heavy payload, so it doesn't ride like a crossover. But among dual cab utes, the Amarok and the Ranger are still among the best. But the Aventura has quite a sporty ride quality because it's been given an athletic suspension tune and unique dampers. So at low speed, it can be a little firm at times, but the payoff is that the high-speed ride and handling is excellent, and it's actually quite fun to drive, which is an odd thing to say for a ute, but it is. The driver's seat gets really low, the steering is great, the handling is surprisingly good, you can set an excellent pace, and the 21-inch wheels are part of the reason that it's so good because the turn-in is really crisp by dual cab standards, certainly more so than if you had an 18-inch wheel and a chubby tyre, for instance. Now, unfortunately, the Amarok Panamericanas that we've been driving on the vehicle's launch here in South Africa have been wearing a different wheel size to what we'll get in Australia, so I can't really tell you how that spec rides and handles yet, apart from the fact that it feels a little softer and bouncier than the Aventura, which is what we would normally expect from a dual cab. Also, I'm very keen to drive the new Amarok Style, which sits in the middle of the range and looks like a bit of a sweet spot once you option the V6 diesel onto it, but we'll only get a drive of that car in April 2023, so make sure to subscribe down below. In terms of refinement, this is a quiet ute. The Ranger is similar in that regard. I think the two cars probably have the same glass, and road noise might be a little higher in the Aventura because of its big fat tires, but it's absolutely fine. As utes go, it's quiet, it's hushed, and the stereo quality from the Harman Kardon is really good, so you can really enjoy driving this ute, particularly because the seat is so comfortable. Much more comfortable than Ford's seat Volkswagen absolutely made the right call by investing in doing their own seat. I'm really, really happy that they did that. Of course, another big leap for the Amarok has come in the safety department. The old generation was really lacking, not just by 2022, by 2017 it was obvious it was lacking. No AEB, no rear side airbags, for instance. All of that has been rectified. We have AEB in this vehicle, the full suite of airbags, junction AEB, lane centering, blind spot monitoring that adapts to the size of your trailer as well. It is, you know, as fully featured as we'd expect for a ute in 2023 in that regard. It just means that we've obviously got the question of what comes next for the Amarok. We know that the T6.2 platform this ute rides on is capable of electrification, and we now know and can reveal it's capable of full electrification as a BEV to compete with vehicles like the Rivian R1T. In my view, Volkswagen and Ford should absolutely develop that concept. This would be a really nice size for an electric pickup. Obviously there's concerns and questions around where you put the rear motor, what your payload is, how much you can tow, which is all very impressive with the diesel. But given how refined and quite premium this ute is to drive, I think it would only get better with a dual motor electric setup. Okay, so we're off-road now, and the biggest change with the second generation Amarok is the fact that it has proper four-wheel drive with low range, even on the automatic transmission variants. So with the old Amarok, you could get a V6 manual which had true low range, but all of the V6 autos were effectively all-wheel drive. They actually went really well off-road, but there's still a segment of the off-roading public that didn't want to engage with the Amarok because it didn't have a traditional two-speed transfer case with low range. Now, this generation corrects that because it picks up Ford's running gear. You can drive the new Amarok in 2 high, being rear-wheel drive. You can drive it in 4 high and 4 low, but there's also a 4 auto mode which shuffles traction around as need be. However, you only get that on the V6 grades. The 4 cylinders don't have it. As for the rest of the Amarok's off-roading bona fides, well, the powertrains have all got lots of torque, 10-speed torque converter automatic gearboxes, so there's heaps of low-range grunt. On the off-roading trails that we've been doing here in South Africa, you really don't need low range because it's just got so much go all the time in the high-range box. There's plenty of articulation. There's an 800-meter wading depth in this vehicle, too dry at the moment for us to put it through any water here, unfortunately, so we'll have to test that back in Australia. But the steering is actually nice and slow at low speed, which makes it quite precise and easy to place the ute on trails like this. But up at higher speeds, the steering gets a bit quicker, so the steering tune they've put into the car feels pretty appropriate. Vision out's good, still got big mirrors just like the first generation Amarok. You've got a bit more drive mode stuff that you can work with in the screen here to sort of customize the experience. All in all, it's very easy. So those are my first impressions of the new Volkswagen Amarok in Aventura V6 diesel form. Now, as utes go, the new Amarok and Ranger are basically as good as it gets in this class, but whether you prefer the Volkswagen iteration or the Ford is really a matter of taste. For people that prefer a more handsome, more subtle, more refined ute, I think you'll appreciate the subtleties of the Volkswagen Amarok. Of course, if you want something a little bit more brash and bold, but still with great ride quality for a ute, you're going to want to go for a Ford Ranger, probably a Raptor, but I think those people won't particularly be interested in the Amarok Aventura. And that's the point of this collaboration, 2 different customer bases. So now I want to hear your opinion. Let me know down below in the comments what you think about the new Amarok. Was it a good decision to partner with Ford, remembering that Volkswagen would never have done a second-gen Amarok by themselves? Let me know what you think of this car. While you're there, hit subscribe and a notification bell if you haven't already. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.